A Gallup poll earlier this year showed that only 15% of Americans view China favorably, down 5 points from last year, in the lowest level since 1979. The poll also found that 64% of Americans view China's economic power as posing a critical threat to the US, up 7 points from last year and the highest level since 2013. While Main Street worries about the Chinese economy overtaking the US economy, Wall Street has been quietly cutting its forecast of Chinese economic growth. The Chinese stock market has been one of the worst performing so far this year. What is the truth about the Chinese economy? Is China an economic juggernaut or an economic basket case? Why is Xi Jinping facing the biggest decision of his 10-year rule? Hi, I'm David Wu, a former IMF economist and Wall Street strategist with a 20-year track record of making actionable predictions about the big story shaping our world tomorrow. Political legitimacy is the right to rule or to govern. For the 17th century British philosopher John Locke, political legitimacy comes from the consent of the governed, the people. Locke's idea of consent of the governed became central to America's Declaration of Independence. America's founding document says that governments derive their powers from the consent of the governed. Moreover, it says that whenever any form of government fails to protect the rights of the people, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new governments. The Chinese parallel to the consent of the people is the mandate of heaven. The idea of the mandate of heaven was first formalized 3,000 years ago by the kings of the Zhou dynasty to legitimize their overthrow of the earlier Song dynasty. The idea is that heaven bestows the right to rule based on virtue and the ability to govern. The corollary to the right to rule is that people have the right to remove an unjust ruler. Mengzi, the student of Confucius, famously said, "People are of primary importance. The state is of less importance. The sovereign is of least importance." The dispensability of rulers, especially bad rulers, in Confucianism has kept Chinese rulers on their toes for more than 2,000 years. This is because the right to rebellion is not just a theoretical construct. Over the past 2,000 years, there were more than 50 major rebellions in China and many, many more local rebellions. The Chinese take Confucianism seriously and literally. In many ways, China's one-party system today has much in common with the Chinese imperial system before 1912. The president is powerful like the emperor, and the Communist Party runs the country much like the mandarins, the scholar officials who ran imperial China. And like the emperor in the past, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, is afraid of rebellion. The Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, the two main policies of the CCP during the first 30 years of his rule, left many Chinese either destitute, starving, or dead. A major rebellion might have broken out after the death of Mao Zedong in 1976, if things had not started to improve. Today, the CCP is increasingly relying on its achievements, especially economic achievements, to justify its rule. And objectively, it has good reason to think that its political legitimacy is strong. Since 1980, the standard of living of average Chinese citizens has been rising at a brisk pace. Over the past 40 years, China's per capita GDP, based on purchasing power parity, has increased by a whopping 2,500%. Since 1980, life expectancy in China has increased from 64 to 78, higher than even in the US. Since 1982, adult literacy rate has increased from 65% to 97%. These achievements will be considered impressive under any system of government, dictatorship or democracy. What I want to talk about in this video is whether this rapid convergence of China's standard of living to that of rich countries will continue. Since 2008, the rate of growth of China's per capita GDP has slowed. The concern is that China is now falling into the so-called middle income trap. Middle income because per capita income in China is still far lower than the level in developed countries. Among the G20 economies, China's per capita income is 50% lower than that of Japan, the poorest among major developed countries. Even among developing countries, per capita income in China is lower than in Turkey, Russia, Argentina, and even Mexico. How long would it take for China to catch up to the US or Germany? It depends on how much faster China can grow relative to the US and Germany. If per capita income in China can grow 5 percentage points faster than the US, it will take just 28 more years for China to reach America's standard of living. However, if per capita income in China can grow only 3 percentage points faster, it will take 45 more years. If per capita income in China can grow only 2 percentage points faster, then it will take 68 more years for Chinese people to enjoy the same standard of living of Americans. In other words, not in this lifetime for most people in China today. Whether China's catch-up turns out to be fast or slow will have great implications for the entire world. For the global north, it is a question of how fast its influence in the world will diminish. For the global south, it is a question of whether they should adopt China's economic model or not. It goes without saying that much is at stake. Economic theory says that the only way to raise the standard of living of people is to raise their productivity. If workers are more productive, they will be paid more, and thus they will be able to spend more. Urbanization through the sharing, matching, and learning mechanisms has been a major driver of China's labor productivity growth. Since 1990, urban population in China has grown from just 300 million people to now 900 million people. That is from 26 to 62% of the population. As a result, 6 of the 25 largest cities in the world today are in China. At least on paper, with China's urbanization rate still lower than those of developed countries like Japan and South Korea, the potential for further labor productivity gains remains great. Yet, we should not take this for granted. When China's economy was growing rapidly, the migration of rural workers to the cities helped ease labor market bottlenecks while offering rural workers higher pay opportunities. However, with the economy slowing down, and with youth unemployment rate in urban areas at 21%, continued rapid migration from the countryside to cities could only make things worse and foment social tension and perhaps even rebellion. The golden age of China's urbanization is probably already over. To see this, we just need to realize that the rapid urbanization of China during the past 30 years was largely enabled by China's rapid export growth. China's share of global trade in goods went from less than 2% to 15% during this period. This massive increase in China's global market share in manufactured goods created tens of millions of jobs in urban areas that sucked in surplus labor from the rural areas. And if there's one thing that we can be certain about, it is that China's export growth will likely never return to the double-digit growth that it maintained for so many years. Why? Because with global trade growing in low single digits, for Chinese exports to achieve double-digit growth, it would imply a further increase in China's market share. Yet, as we've seen over the past few years, other countries are balking at surrendering more market share to China. Given China's global market share has already exceeded that of Germany and Japan at their peak, it was always just a question of time before this political backlash erupted. And now that it's erupted, it is difficult to see how the protectionist genie can be put back into the bottle. China's exports were down 3% in the first half of this year, despite the lifting of the lockdown at the end of last year. This partly reflects the slump in global demand for manufactured goods. But the reality is that U.S. imports from China as a share of total U.S. imports fell below 15% in the 12 months to June. This was the lowest level since 2006. China is fighting back. Huawei, sanctioned in the global north, is boosting its 5G exports to the global south. BYD just launched an entry-level electric car model with a battery range of 300 kilometers that costs only a quarter of average EVs on the road in Europe. Nevertheless, with political ties turning against China, Chinese exporters will now have to run faster than their foreign competitors just to stay in the race. Against this backdrop, perhaps the best China can do is to hold on to its global market share. This would imply export growth in the low single digits. Beijing may protest against the international backlash to its dominant global market share, but it did see it coming. Since 2010, Chinese policymakers have been trying to reduce the dependence of Chinese economic growth on export by supporting domestic consumption. It did so primarily by pumping credit into the economy. The result was a massive increase in home prices. The increase in home prices made homeowners feel wealthier, and for a while there were signs that the Chinese consumers were coming of age. But economic growth driven by asset price inflation can only go on for so long before an asset bubble becomes a drag on growth. We saw this in Japan in the 1990s, and we're seeing it now in China. Not only has the Chinese housing bubble reached a dangerous level, but the debt buildup over the past 10 years in both the private and the public sectors are making it worse. For one thing, in the event that this housing bubble should burst, the ability of the government to provide substantial fiscal support is limited. Not to mention that China is already running a huge budget deficit. Not to mention that with an aging population and an underfunded pension system, China faces an increasingly bleak fiscal outlook. The political legitimacy of the CCP depends on its ability to keep improving the standard of living of the average citizens of China. Raising the standard of living requires raising labor productivity. China's relatively low urbanization rate implies great potential for strong labor productivity growth. However, to unlock this potential, China will have to overcome three constraints. One, a limited ability to increase market share in the global trade in goods. Two, a limited ability to further expand its balance sheet. Three, increasingly limited ability to access foreign technologies as a result of a concerted attempt by the West to hold China back in the technology race. These constraints are real and growing. The only way out is accelerated economic reforms and deregulations to unleash the private sector. The pace of economic reforms in China slowed under Xi Jinping's 10-year rule. Xi favors state control and direction of the economy, and under his watch, state-owned firms have increased their influence at the expense of private firms. I guess it should be viewed as a positive development that last week the government announced that it will strive to create a market-oriented, first-class business environment. The measures unveiled include protection of property rights of private firms and entrepreneurs and steps to ensure fair market competition by breaking down market entry barriers. Every crisis is an opportunity. China needs to change course sharply if the CCP is to retain its political legitimacy. What the CCP will do in the next few months will tell us whether the Confucian political system can continue to serve China as it tries to improve the lot of its people. If you got something out of this program, please hit like and subscribe to my free YouTube channel. Let me know what you think by posting your comments on the video. If you want to learn more about my investment strategy, come visit us at davidwuunbound.com. Thank you for listening.